I'd like to thank Greg for the invitation to come here and speaking to you today. It's an honor. This may be one of my favorite days of the whole year. October 13th is very significant for Our Lady, but very significant for the world. My name is Paul Regan, and I'm a Eucharistic Apostle of Divine Mercy. We're a lay group that works under the tutelage of the Marians of the Immaculate Conception at the National Shrine of Divine Mercy. I'm the founder of the Chaplet of Divine Mercy for the Sick and Dying, and we have received 4 apostolic blessings from the Pope as an organization. I think today I'm going to give you an awful lot of information, things you may not have heard, and things that hopefully will clarify the situation in the world that we live in and why. This afternoon, I'll give you the answers, I think, to all the problems facing humanity today. So in this first talk, I'm going to give you some papal quotes. I'm going to refer to Fatima, Medjugorje. By the way, I think Medjugorje, I shouldn't say this, but I've heard from pretty good sources that Medjugorje may be designated as an international Marian shrine as early as next month. The messages will not be approved, of course, because they're ongoing, but it's a great designation, and it's a nice day for Our Lady to begin to anticipate this, because I think she'll be very happy with it. So, as we continue on today, as I said, I'm going to give you a lot of information, and the 13th of the month is what I'm going to begin with. The 13th of every month is dedicated to Our Lady. That's requested at an apparition site at Montichiari Fontanelle in the late 40s and early 50s. It's by design. Everything the Blessed Mother does and says is by design. She must anticipate the Church's approval on all things. And when the Church doesn't approve certain things, that doesn't mean she stops. She'll continue until it becomes evident that whatever is to be and whatever her desires is will be accomplished. And as I talk today, I'm going to talk about the various aspects of the consecration to those nations done by John Paul who are awaiting a consecration. And I'm going to give you some insights to it and what I think is going on concerning it. So it's very important we pay attention to some of these events, because I'm going to try and present things in a chronological order so that they become more understandable. Paint a picture, so to speak. So, as I said, the 13th of the month is very important. Next year is 2013. One reason Our Lady may have chosen 13th as the number she's requesting is dedicated to her every month of every year is the number of Masonry is 13. The biggest, one of the secret societies in the world, is the Illuminati and the Masonry, out to attack the Church, out to attack its papal authority. All right, papal authority. Not necessarily the Pope, but his authority. Because if you cut the head off, the body follows. So this is a very critical aspect of what I believe is happening not only outside the church, but inside the church today. And I'll make references to it by way of papal quotes. So when we look at October 13th, it's the last apparition of Our Lady of Fatima. The great miracle of the sun occurs on this particular day. I'm honored to be able to speak on this particular day, to be totally sincere with you, because I believe it's one of the most important days of the 20th century for sure, and maybe in all of Christendom, for the ramifications which result from this day. Now, also on October 13th, and another date, is another great aspect of the Catholic Church that has occurred that sometimes we don't look at and have forgotten about. It's Pope Leo XIII's great vision in October 13th, 1884. And this, to me, is tied in to Our Lady of Fatima totally. He was had just completed saying Mass, and he was walked down the steps at St. Peter's, turned toward the tabernacle to bow. As he did, his head looked up way above the tabernacle, almost to the top of the dome. And when he did, he was receiving what he called, now remember, this is the Pope, a discussion between Satan and God the Father. Satan said, "Give me 100 years and I will destroy your church." And God the Father said, "You have the 100 years, but after that, no more." Very important. Now, he saw visions of the 20th century. The catastrophic wars that would occur, and he saw in particular the catastrophe that was occurring inside the Catholic Church, and he was appalled by it. So appalled by it, he went to the sacristy, asked to be left alone, and wrote the prayer to St. Michael the Archangel. Defend us in the battle, be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray, and do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the divine power of God, drive into hell Satan and all the other evil spirits who wander throughout the world, seeking the ruin of souls. This is a prayer of exorcism. Now, Pope Leo XIII, and he made it a papal bull, and it was said at the end of every low mass prior to Vatican II from that time forward. And he meant it directly for the world, but most importantly for the church itself. For whatever he saw, whatever he heard, directly would be affecting the Catholic Church. Mostly in the second part of the 20th century, he believed. But now, when did the 100 years begin is the question. He didn't know. He didn't know when these 100 years began or ended. And it's crucial. So many people speculated maybe it's from 1884 on. Remember the time now. October 13th, 12 noon, and the vision lasted for 12 minutes. Let's fast forward here a minute, 33 years, precisely, to October 13th, 1917, in Fatima. At exactly 12 noon, the sun spun, a predicted miracle, for 12 minutes. Our Lady is very, very adept at giving every aspect of any word she says, the dress she wears, the color of it, the time of day. All of those things are important because they're perfect. They're all in God's plan. They're not just by chance. She doesn't preen and get dressed up to serve the needs of the visionary and to look good because she's going someplace important like most of us would do. Everything has a message to it. So in this relationship between October 13th, 1884 and October 13th, 1917, we see a direct relationship. Now, this miracle of the sun lasted 12 minutes. Obviously, it was the most phenomenal thing that the world had ever seen up until this point. The whole worldwide press was there because In the July message, she said, in October, I will give you a sign where the whole world would believe. When asked by the children to prove that she's appearing, other people don't believe them. So when that was made public, over 75,000 people were there. The New York Times actually carried it the next day in their front page. So this was a worldwide event. So if that was all, then we wouldn't be able to delve into trying to find out the beginning date of that 100 years. I think we can now. And I think that Our Lady's message on that day becomes monumentally important to understanding the future of the world. She said, I would want Russia consecrated to me. If you do this, an era of peace will be granted to the world unknown to man. If you do not, and also included the 5 first Saturday devotions and a rosary for the conversion of the world of sinners. If you do not, an evil menace out of Russia called communism will spread its errors throughout the world. Now, in Portugal at the time, there was communism. But she didn't say just communism. She said communism out of Russia would spread its errors throughout the world. Russian communism was totalitarian communism, meaning it's a statist, elitist, who dictates what the church will believe and what it will not believe. Most churches were banned for 75 years. I spoke in the Warsaw Pact countries, bishops from Russia, 17 countries, Romania, Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, 6 years ago. And we're talking about specifically how to grow the laity in the church, how to build churches. Churches were open. But you have to remember, after 75 years, churches being closed, and nobody except for an underground church attending Mass, there's a wide gap between the elderly, those 85 and above, who recognized and remembered the Catholic Church, and from those 15 and under maybe who were just beginning to learn it. But there's nobody in between to teach it. And priests are up against it over there. Yes, the churches are open, but there's nobody to teach the faith. Very few. The missionaries that do go over there are making some progress, but there's no conversion in Russia going on. I can state that definitively. I know other people have said it. I think they're hoping that this would be true. I don't think it is. I think they're stagnant. They've reelected Putin as their president, former KGB agent. But my aspect that I'm getting at, it's totalitarian communism. Spread its errors throughout the world. Now I'm going to read you a quote from John Paul that was given in 1976 as Cardinal Karol Wojtyła. It's related to this topic. And it was at Philadelphia at the International Eucharistic Congress. He was the keynote speaker. Now, every pope, one of their greatest charisms is prophecy. That's what they do. That's what a lot of encyclical letters, they warn you about the perils of this or that, or what will happen as a result. Humanae Vitae is a perfect example. Almost everything in Humanae Vitae that was worried about happened. So we take these things when popes make declarations very seriously. So let me read this, and I think you get a better grasp. Remember, this was 36 years ago. So when you talk about a prophetic pope, and a pope with knowledge of a geopolitical nature as well as a mystical pope, receiving messages from Our Lady, which he did, and implementing a lot of the requests of Our Lady. Listen to what he said when he was Cardinal Carotia. 2 years later, he was to be made Pope. According to the Diary of Faustina, he was the bishop that uncovered the error of the devotion, which wasn't an error, it was the interpretation between Polish and Italian that put the devotion in dormancy for a while until in 1966, when he uncovered that error. And the ban was lifted on April 30th, 1978, because of his efforts. 6 months later, he was the first non-Italian Pope in 400 years. Tells you something about the Divine Mercy devotion. He died on Divine Mercy Sunday. After the Mass, remember it was Holy Saturday night, first Saturday night, but the Masses begin for Divine Mercy Sunday, had begun at 4 in the afternoon. The Mass was celebrated by Bishop Jeevitz at his bedside, and at the end of the bedside was an image of the Divine Mercy, of which he was in his dying minutes and dying breaths, but was doing devotion to the Divine Mercy image. He received a little piece of the host from Bishop Jeevitz at communion, and he died within the hour. But he died on Divine Mercy Sunday, it's the vigil. What are the odds of this non-Italian Pope, Polish Pope, being elected with his mission in the very beginning of his ministry was Divine Mercy? And he quotes, given to him by quote unquote God himself at his ordination. This was a great man. This was a man that had vision and had fortitude, courage, everything you need. Love, compassion, mercy, unquestionable mercy, as we see him with Ali Aga in a pose when he was in jail, went to jail to forgive him, and it looked like a confessional type pose. During the sexual scandals, all he can do is forgive. A person goes to confession to you, you must forgive as a Catholic. You'll be forgiven as you forgive. I know it's hard to take, but at the same time, he did the right thing. So let me read this quote, and I'm going to go back to it because it's the linchpin that led me to understand this whole Leo XIII in Fatima vision. We are now standing in the face of the greatest historical confrontation humanity has ever gone through. I do not think that wide circles of the American society or wide circles of the Christian community realize this fully. We are now facing the final confrontation between the church and the anti-church, the gospel and the anti-gospel. This confrontation lies within the plans of divine providence. It is a test of 2,000 years of culture and Christian civilization, with all of its consequences for human dignity, individual rights, human rights, and the rights of nations. Phenomenal quote, 35 years ago, 36 years ago. We are now living this quote. Let me pass it again, go over it a little slowly. Excuse me. We are now standing in the greatest historical confrontation. There's been nothing greater in the history of man that humanity has ever gone through. I do not think that wide circles of the American society or wide circles of the Christian community realize this fully. We are now facing the final confrontation. Final, there are no more battles between the church and the anti-church, the gospel and the anti-gospel. So we know what the church is, dogmatically, doctrinally. We know where we stand, or should. In the anti-church, who is the anti-church? The anti-church are made up by the secret societies, some of which I've mentioned, the atheists of the world, those who absolutely detest the Catholic Church and its teachings, the nihilists of the world, who hate any structure or power of any type. Those are the normal culprits. But what we have going on inside our church now is the real culprit. The real anti-church that's destroying the church is inside the church, who are refusing to accept papal authority, did it under John Paul's reign, who are assuming power and vacuum power that they don't have. They don't like to be told what to do. They think their personal conscience controls their ability to disobey the teachings of the church, which is wrong. And you see it spread through our educational system, in our colleges, our high schools. You have many cardinals and bishops inside the Curia who are trying to adapt and adopt a false ecumenism and a false sense of social justice. They're big movements in the church. They're contradictory. For example, the Jesuits in South and Latin America in 1984 were preaching liberation theology, the social justice network of climbing in bed with the communists and the socialists of those countries, as if they could coexist for the right of social justice. It was condemned by the Pope, so much so that he took the general of the Jesuit order and put the order in receivership and replaced them. So much so that he had all clergy remove themselves from political office on a worldwide basis. That's how dangerous he felt this was. That movement is growing stronger and stronger right now. It's morphed. And that movement's strong in the United States. And a false ecumenism. False ecumenism is trying to establish a rapport, rapprochement if you want, with all Christian denominations. That's fine. But not at the expense of the Eucharist, Our Lady, and papal authority. And I'm going to cite as an example of that Don Bosco's vision of 1862. Don Bosco is probably his most famous vision. He had dreams, and in this dream, he saw a huge white ship, an ocean liner. And the ship was traversing a terrible, calamitous sea, huge waves whacking against the ship, knocking it to and fro, back and forth, up and down. The skies were dark, lightning was striking all around him. And the captain of the ship was trying to steer the ship into a safe harbor that was directly ahead of him. And many in the ship did not like the direction the captain was steering the ship, and they jumped ship to save themselves. They went into canoes, lifeboats. And in those lifeboats were cannons, and they were taking pot shots at the big ship to try and bring it down. Now, this captain was the Pope. The white ship is the Catholic Church. Those who were jumping ship were people inside the Catholic Church, trying to destroy it. Now, when this vision was given in 1862, John Bosco gave the date approximately when this would be occurring. He said the church will be in this state in the year 1999 dash, in and about the turn of the century. That's what it means. The 1990 dash means, the dash means in or about. Who was the Pope in that time? It's John Paul. Now, what John Paul was steering the ship, there were two pillars on either side of the safe harbor he was trying to aim toward. One was a pillar of the Blessed Mother. The second was a pillar of the Eucharist. And he was trying to bring the ship in between those two pillars. And on those two pillars were two huge chains that he was trying to hook the ship to that would guide him into the safe harbor. That was the vision, the meaning of which I think we are living out. For example, 2 years before John Paul died, he gave us the Mysteries of Light as part of a Marian year, basically, in devotion to Our Lady. That's one of the pillars, pillar of the Blessed Mother. The next year just before he died, he gave us the year of the Eucharist. And he did it with papal authority, declaring it. This was not by chance. He knew exactly what he was doing. So what we see from that vision puts that vision in time and space, meaning that's the state of the church, basically, that we're going through now. That's part of the anti-church that I'm referring to. The anti-gospel and the gospel. That's the next line. What is the anti-gospel? Obviously, those who choosing to say whatever their political philosophy is. We have a whole church full of, not a whole church, but a lot of cafeteria Catholics who pick and choose as if it's their option. They're not suggestions, they're commandments. And when you start doing that, you're running very close to committing grievous sin against the first commandment. I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt not have strange gods before me. The strange God becomes you, your own conscience. Because what you're saying, through pride and disobedience, two root sins that accompany every sin, pride being the sin of Lucifer, disobedience, the sin of Adam. What you're saying is, pridefully, I don't want to believe that, or rationalize the commandment, and then disobey it. Because you think you can, and still call yourself a Catholic. You can't. Catholic Church is a seamless garment. It's not broken. It's woven as one. If anything is not one, holy, Catholic, or apostolic, the four pillars of the Catholic Church, then it is not Catholic. When you have a divided church, we're not one. When you have a church split in two as being holy, who's holy? We're not one. Catholic is the same gospel being preached throughout the world. No, it's not Catholic. Apostolic, if you're not following the apostolic dictates given by Christ himself to the Pope, thou art Peter, upon this rock I will build my church, the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Whatever you bind is bound, whatever you loose is loosed. Whose sins you shall forgive, they're forgiven. Whose sins you shall retain, they retain. They're given to one person, Peter, so that there isn't division in the church, that all follow that one particular papal authority. When we stop doing that, we become divided, and we allow evil to creep into our church and being taught in our schools to younger generations. That's what's occurred. That's what we need Our Lady for. She warned us about these things. When we look at our government, remember we talked about totalitarian communism, where the state tells the church what they can believe or not believe, and what they must do. If that rings a bell, it should, because we're in it. And no one knows it. So we're in a period of time that is very critical. Because I want to just finish this and go back to the 100 years, because I think it will become self-evident. Ooh, excuse me. This confrontation lies with the plans of divine providence, meaning this confrontation is scripturally based. It is a test of 2,000 years of culture in Christian civilization, with all of its consequences for human dignity, human rights, individual rights, and the rights of nations. Talking about to the victor goes the spoils. You may not have human dignity. You may not have individual rights. You may not have human rights. And you may not have a nation. Sovereignty. The rights of nations. That's from 1976. We are now living it. It's a prophecy given. So what is the importance of this quote and what's being said at Fatima? It's monumental. Monumental. Now, how do we know when the 100 years begins and ends? We can figure it out through this day, October 13th, 1917. We know that it's totalitarian form of communism that's going to spread its errors throughout the world. On October 13, 1917, there was no totalitarian communism in Russia. Tsar Nicholas was still in charge. Catholic Tsar. So, how do we reconcile this? How do we know when this begins? The battle that he's talking about, the greatest historical confrontation, the final battle, is chapter 12 of the book of Revelation. It's the red dragon spews out water to devour the woman with child. She flees to the desert. According to Father Stefano Gobi, according to Our Lady from Stefano Gobi, the red dragon is totalitarian communism. Spews out water. The water represents all the means of social communication, TV, radio, books, internet, movies, any way by which you receive information. Now you wonder why when you turn your TV on, you think it may be skewed. Yeah, it's skewed. This is worldwide, not just here. To devour the woman with child. What is she birthing? Divine mercy. The red dragon is trying to kill her and all her children. Catholic Church. And it's going to be statism, totalitarian communism, the means. It's going to be worldwide. So, when does it begin, this battle? When does the 100 years begin? We now know. From the quote of John Paul, from the words of Our Lady at Fatima, to the present situation in the world we're looking at, it begins when Russian communism is established. It was November 7th, 1917. Trotsky and Lenin took over, 25 days after Our Lady's warning. Now, when we see this, we count out 100 years. Remember, God is a God of order. What he ordains, he attains. 100 years is a very important figure historically in the church. It took Noah 100 years to build the ark. The Sacred Heart devotion, which was not done, was first asked for by Margaret Mary in 1689. God waited 100 years for the King of France, along with all the bishops of France, to consecrate France to the Sacred Heart. He didn't do it. Leo XIV was king, Leo XV followed, Leo XVI followed. 100 years, I think to the day, I'm not sure of that, but I think to the day. Louis XVI was arrested and put in the Bastille, called for a spiritual director, priest. He said, I think I should do that consecration that was asked for. The spiritual director said, it's too late. It had to be done by the king with all the bishops of France, solemnly and publicly. 2 weeks later, he was dead, and his wife, Marie Antoinette, was killed, both beheaded. And what was the warning given by Christ in 1689? What did he say? He said, if you do not consecrate France to me, my Sacred Heart, thousands upon thousands of clergy will be killed. You will lose the papal states. An evil called church and state separation will begin. You will begin a series of wars where millions of people will be killed. If you do it, you will be spared from defeat in all wars as a country. A couple of years later, Napoleon Bonaparte started his Napoleonic Wars, which millions were killed. Over 20,000 clergy were killed in France alone. They lost the papal states. And the French Revolution began. Separation of church and state. The state took over the auspices of the church. 100 years. 100 years, Leo XIII will be up 2017. So these things are more real than you can imagine. God's a God of order. What he ordained for himself, he will ordain for his mother. That's her request. Has it been done? Has that consecration been done? Controversial, yes. Good people on both sides. I say no, and I say no because it wasn't done according to what Our Lady asked for, much like the King of France. What she asked for was Russia specifically to be named, with all the bishops of the world participating. Because of an agreement made in 1960, I'm going to try to give you the best rendition of why I believe it has never been done, and why the popes didn't do it in 1960. Some of you may be old enough to remember that that was greatly anticipated, the reading of the Third Secret of Fatima in 1960, by the world, non-Catholics alike. John the 23rd was the Pope. He did not read the Third Secret to the people, as was requested. It was the Pope that was informed the people. There was a reason why he did it. When he became Pope, he didn't read the Third Secret right away. And before he read the Third Secret, he sent his Secretary of State to Russia and offered an agreement with Khrushchev in the Soviet Union, Russia. He said, if you stop persecuting Catholics in the Warsaw Pact countries, we as a church will stop condemning communism publicly. Agreement was signed. After which he read the Third Secret of Fatima, of which, again, I don't believe we've heard the whole aspect of that. In it contained references to Russian communism and the state of decay in the church by way of heresy, lack of faith, apostasy. Now, he brought in 9 cardinals, John the 23rd, and asked them what he should do. 7 said, since it's only private revelation and you entered into a document freely, officially representing the Catholic Church, you must abide by the contract you've made. So he said publicly, it must not be, God must not want it to be read now. It must be for some other time, somebody else, because I've been placed in this position. And that's okay, I mean, that's his decision. But it also bound every other pope. Now, in 1984, John Paul tries to get around the whole situation as diplomatically as he could. So when he asked for the consecration, he asked that those nations who you've been long awaiting, instead of Russia by name. And not all the bishops of the church did it with him. When Lucy was asked, she said, well, it wasn't as the Blessed Mother had asked, but it was accepted. Now, this, you have to understand, any pope that consecrates anything to God, he has binding promise in that. That consecration is accepted. Always. Pius XII did the whole world in the 50s. Every pope has consecrated some aspect. Every consecration is accepted by God that a pope gives. The question was not asked directly. Was it done according to the wishes of the Blessed Mother? No. Now, in Father Gobi, she makes a reference to this that's very, very interesting. Remember, this is controversial because good people on both sides, and it is both sides, pretty divided over this. But she said she loved the Pope for what he did, John Paul, what he tried to do. And I think she rewarded him, but it wasn't done according to her wishes. So it's not done. That's according to Father Gobi from Our Lady. But what she does, because of what he tried to do, and she understood his intent and the love he has for her, what he did, well, what she did, was allow the communist Warsaw Pact countries to be freed. 3 years later, the Pope declared a Marian year in 1987, and that began the fall of the communist system. Bloodless fall. Unheard of. And the dissolving of the Soviet Union, which the contract between the Vatican and the Soviet Union was signed. Therefore, it's null and void. Therefore, the Pope would be free to consecrate Russia now or any time following that. The reason the Pope, John Paul, and Benedict, I hope Benedict do it, I don't think he will, I think the next Pope following him will. The reason is that not all the bishops would do it. So therefore, the longer this went on, the danger, you begin to see why she wanted it done in 1960. Because then we were still strong enough as a church where all the bishops were obedient and would obey. Now we're not. So it will become very difficult. But Our Lady promises it, and Christ promises it, that it will occur. Christ appeared to Lucia in 1929 in Tway, you know, that's very little known fact, following Our Lady appearing to her in Tway. And in 1929, Our Lady asked that the consecration of Russia be done then. Be done then. It was the will of the Holy Trinity that it be done. tell the bishop, pass it along to the Pope, which was done, and nothing occurred. Christ himself appeared about 3 to 4 months later, said, now I am asking you, and you are to go to the bishop, give this to the Pope, that I want my mother's Immaculate Heart to triumph, and I want the consecration of Russia to Immaculate Heart to be done now. And he added a caveat. He said, this time, not like the King of France, this time it will be done, but it will be done very late. Those are Christ's words to Lucia. Lucia, called the magisterium teaching authority, many involved in the magisterial teaching authority, their thinking is in diabolical disorientation. Those are 2 words. Diabolical, evil source, disoriented in seeing truth and how to run the Catholic Church. There are many that are tremendous Catholics. We're not talking about everyone here, but we're talking about a certain segment, that anti-church he's referring to here, that is causing many problems within the church itself. So 2 enemies inside the church: false ecumenism, false social justice. There are many in the social justice movement who will tell you that socialism is a good thing, that the original apostles were socialists. No, they weren't. Don't let them tell you that. Original apostles used to distribute from the collective community as representatives of the church to those unfortunate. So those that donated, that had the means to give to the poor, they did, and the apostles distributed it. The apostles didn't take it and give it to Caesar for his use. So we're seeing the beginning of a very difficult situation in the church that is going to be rectified. That consecration will be done. It's a promise from both Jesus and Mary. But we're running desperately late in the season. Next year is going to be a colossal year. Our Lady's going to take action. She's on the move. You're going to see things change drastically. You're going to have to suffer some, but you're going to see great, great, great things beginning to occur of a supernatural characteristic. I think my time is up. So what I'm going to do is I want to give you solutions to some of the problems that we now face in the next talk. I'm going to talk about, finish a little of this. I'm going to give you another quote from John Paul. The last words he ever spoke to the world before he died, January 12, 2005. He died on April 2nd, 2005. So I want to give you that quote because I think it'll tie everything in to the questions you may have. So I want to thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to Greg.